Hey, this is Brett, and you're watching Brett and Some Books. We are continuing Who Ate the First Oyster by Cody Cassidy. This particular chapter is entitled Who First Discovered the Americas. If the time of our species on Earth were a day, this happened at 10:43 at night, 16,000 years ago. On October 12th, 1492, when Christopher Columbus sighted what came to be called the New World and claimed it for the Kingdom of Spain, an estimated 50 million people already lived there. Clearly, his discovery merits an asterisk. Even calling Columbus the first European to discover the New World is problematic. Most researchers agree that the Norseman Leif Erickson landed on Newfoundland coast nearly 500 years before Columbus was born. Christopher Columbus was more accurately the last person to discover the Americas. There was, however, a first. Unlike the other uninhabitable continents, the Americas are isolated from the African cradle of our species by ocean and ice. The result is that no hominin footprint touched them until 16,000 years ago, when the Canadian ice sheets first began to melt, and a member of the group of incredible adventurers living on the landmass connecting Siberia and Alaska placed the first foot in the unglaciated New World. Who was it? I'll call him Derzu, after the great 18th century Siberian explorer Derzu Uzala. Our Derzu was born 16,000 years ago, at the tail end of the last ice age, and more than 5,000 years before the agricultural revolution on the other side of the world, which means that at the time of his birth, every human on Earth still hunted and gathered their food. Derzu was born on Beringia, which is what archaeologists call the now sunken Texas-sized piece of land that once connected Siberia and Alaska. Today, it's sometimes called a land bridge, but it was hardly a Panamanian-sized isthmus of land. Instead, Beringia is the closest to a sunken continent this planet can offer. When Derzu was born, a massive ice sheet had trapped enough seawater above land to drop ocean levels by nearly 300 feet, which exposed a vast piece of land that is now sunk 150 feet beneath the Bering Sea. When the early Spanish explorers theorized that the native people of Americas reached the New World by walking across the mythical Atlantis, they were more right than they knew. Little is known about Derzu's culture. The Bering Sea has drawn most of their archaeological sites, so what paleoanthropologists have pieced together is largely based upon language reconstruction, DNA from the earliest Americans, and the vanishingly few traces they left in Alaska and the northern Yukon. It's indisputable that their perseverance is one of humankind's greatest survival stories. Derzu was surrounded by uninhabitable environments. To his east lay the skyscraper-sized Cordilleran ice sheet, which spanned nearly the entire western half of Canada. To his north and south, the frigid Arctic and Bering Seas. To his west, the freezing deserts of Siberia. His home itself was one of the most formidable, inhospitable environments our species has ever settled. Beringia bordered the Arctic Circle during one of the coldest periods in human history. The average temperature was below zero. In the winter, the highs rarely rose above freezing. Shrubs were sparse, and trees non-existent, so archaeologists believe the Beringians relied on twigs and bone to fuel their fires. Derzu was a fully modern Homo sapiens, as smart as, and probably smarter than, you or me. And according to archaeologist James Chatter's reconstruction of the first Americans, Derzu may have more closely resembled the Aboriginals of Australia than the Eskimo and the Inuit. Like any modern Homo sapiens, Dersu would have danced, played music, and told stories. He spent time with his children, cooked his food, filled his days hunting the kelp forest that ringed the northern Pacific. He ate seal, fish, shellfish, and when he was lucky, the occasional wild horse. One of the few pieces of evidence of the Beringians left behind is a horse jaw with a deep stone-cut groove, which archaeologists found in a cave in northern Yukon. The jawbone suggests that 24,000 years ago, in the Bluefish Caves, a Beringian cut out and enjoyed a horse tongue. Dersu wore furs he made from the skins of seal, walrus, hare, elk, and moose that he hunted. His primary weaponry consisted of spears with sharpened flint and obsidian points, and darts he launched with a type of spear thrower called an atlatl. He fished with nets and ate shellfish he gathered. He lived among the mammoths, but he probably didn't kill them as often as myths might suggest. Dersu may have lived in a clan as small as just 4 or 5 families, an estimate supported by a 12,000-year-old site in Sun River, Alaska. But he communicated, traded, hunted, and even paired off with his neighbors. Prior to the discovery of 2 young children buried together 34,000 years ago near Moscow, most paleoanthropologists assumed isolated Arctic hunter-gatherers were the product of at least mild incest, but DNA of the 2 children came to the surprising conclusion that they were only distantly related. It seems likely that Dersu and the Arctic tribes found incest as taboo as we do today, and maintained relationships with distant tribes to avoid it. Dersu must have occupied a position of some political authority within his group, a role typically filled by an elderman in Arctic hunter-gathering cultures. Just by reaching middle age, Dersu had already overcome long odds. Many ancient hunter-gatherer societies suffered an elevated rate of childhood mortality, but in the Arctic it may have been particularly bleak. Even in more technologically advanced hunter-gatherer groups, as many as 40% of children died. In Beringia, it may have been a coin flip whether a child reached their 10th birthday. Dersu may have had the good fortune to survive into adulthood, but if he fathered children, he would have likely suffered loss. At the Sun River site, archaeologists found 3 buried bodies. They're all children. A few families used the seasonal homes for years, the archaeologists believe, but after they cremated a 3-year-old in the center of their hut, they abandoned the site for good, a hint, perhaps, at prehistoric heartbreak. Dersu was one of the first Beringians for whom traveling south was an option. For 15,000 years, a period 3 times longer than all of written history, the half-mile-thick Cordilleran ice sheet blocked any movement south. Until recently, most scholars believed the founding New World population arrived through central Canada some 13,000 years ago, when a pathway melted between the Cordilleran and the Laurentide ice sheets along their meeting point at the Continental Divide. But recent discoveries of an earlier American presence have all but laid that theory to rest. In the last decade, archaeologists have turned up significant evidence of human occupation in Oregon and Chile dated before the Great Divide path opened. Many archaeologists, including University of Oregon archaeology professor John Erlandson, are now convinced humans arrived at least 16,000 years ago. At that time, the only viable route would have been a treacherous journey in small boats along the western Canadian coastline. Recent surveys of Canadian coastal boulders have confirmed a few first peeked out from the ice sheet some 16,000 years ago, suggesting a pathway existed. When I spoke to Erlandson about the possibility of a coastal journey, he told me he believes the thriving kelp forest that ringed the northern or the western edge of the Canadian coast not only fed the Beringians, but laid a southern path for Dersu to follow. Erlinson's research has led him to believe that this kelp highway ran from Beringia all the way to Baja, providing food and incentive for Dersu's journey. Yet Dersu would have lacked the large, open ocean boats required to make the entire trip in a single voyage. The giant trees needed for such a vessel simply didn't exist in Beringia. Instead, his boats probably looked like modern-day kayaks, with animal skins stretched across a driftwood or whalebone frame. These kayaks couldn't have supported multi-day journeys, but Dersu could have used them to fish, hunt, and paddle around the fingers of ice that still protruded into the sea. Even if archaeologists have largely pieced together how Dersu and the first Americans made their journey, the question of why remains elusive. To anyone living today in the comfortable climates south of the 40th parallel, it might seem obvious, but Dersu did not have the benefit of a map. He couldn't have known if what lay ahead was an impassable stretch of ice or of sea, or if where he headed was far worse than where he left. There's no evidence that the Beringians had to leave, either at the tip of a spear or at the brink of starvation, as Arctic hunter-gatherers continued to thrive in Beringia and Alaska for thousands of years after Dersu. Without any obvious imperative forcing Dersu's departure, the best explanation for his voyage may be no more complicated than his desire to explore. Exploration might seem like the frivolous pursuit of a modern person, but the evidence suggests this desire is as old as, if not older than, Homo sapiens. Dersu and his people may have left simply because they wanted to see what lay beyond the horizon. The desire to explore is an offshoot of the evolutionary requirement to see, find, feel, model, and expand the boundaries of our world. It's baked into the human condition. There's no reason to believe Magellans or Neil Armstrongs were any less common in ancient times than they are today. If anything, the rewards of untouched islands and virgin continents may have compelled even more exploration. When archaeologists discover evidence of dangerous journeys like Dersu's, there's a tendency to suspect an enemy or starvation forced the voyagers to take such a dangerous risk. But careful reconstruction of other great seafaring cultures has suggested this isn't necessarily the case. Archaeologists re-examining the movements of an ancient South Pacific culture of navigators called the Lapita found they discovered and moved to multiple islands within single generations. They colonized islands so rapidly that archaeologists now believe the best explanation for their relentless yet incredibly dangerous search was the basic human desire to explore the unknown. Knock it off. Archaeologists don't know how quickly Dersu made the journey down the coast. It could have been within one generation, or it could have been over the course of many. It may have been Dersu's children or grandchildren who first breached the southern glacial barrier, but once beyond the ice sheet, Dersu or his descendants would have discovered an untouched Eden of megafauna including lions, camels, mammoths, mastodons, cheetahs, horses, 125-pound beavers, and giant condors. In all, when Beringians first arrived, 90 separate species weighing more than 100 pounds walked, crawled, or flew in North America. But unlike the large animals of Africa that co-evolved with hominins, the New World megafauna were unadapted, unafraid, and unprepared for the new super-predator. Within 4,000 years, humans hunted all but a few of them to extinction. The new Americans spread so quickly and so thoroughly across the Americas that some linguists believe every Native American language spoke south of Canada originated from a single mother tongue. Despite what flowered into remarkable linguistic diversity, the linguists Joseph Greenberg and Merritt Rulin have found remarkable similarities in the diaspora of languages across the Americas, and based on those similarities, have reconstructed portions of what they believe may have been their mother tongue, the language, in other words, that Dersu spoke. If Greenberg and Rulin are correct, and they certainly had their detractors, though I find their methodology compelling, then because of the unique way the Americas were populated, Dersu could be the first person whose words we know. So when Dersu, who navigated treacherous Arctic seas in the shadows of glaciers to discover the New World, passed away, we may know one of the words he said. His word for death, Rulin believes, sounded like aki. Thanks. That is the end of chapter 7. Please like and subscribe for more.